Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I'm Eve Engler, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And tonight's an exciting night politically. We will learn not too long what the next government situation is. Let's hope that I think the best case realistic scenario is that the Liberals win a very marginal majority. The NDP does a bit better than expected. Poilievre loses his seat, and the Bloc does okay. I think that's about the best we can. That's about the best we can hope for, which is not very good, but better than Poilievre winning. Certainly better than him winning a majority. And so I think there's some possibilities under Carney. Anyways, we'll see not too long, hopefully, what the results are. A lot of developments, Canadian foreign policy, Trump administration agreeing to seabed mining, Vancouver company that has been pushing the Trump administration to have access to mine the bottom of the sea, even though it's there's an agreement that's currently against it, um, and that's been playing out, and the Trump administration is agreeing to this, which would be, I think, quite a bad development. Um, there's a story from actually about 2 weeks ago, but I just saw it. It was Rights Action sent it around. The hazardous machinations of Canada's mining elite. In mining affected communities across Latin America, standing up for community rights is often a deadly venture. Just again, more, it's a somewhat boring story at this point, but all the different human rights and violence engendered by Canadian mining operations in Latin America. The Canadian Network on Corporate Accountability sent around a survey to the parties around their positions on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation. A question about the making the ombudsperson for responsible enterprise independent. Basically, the position that the Liberals agreed to before getting elected and then proposed initially and then backed away from because of hard lobbying from the mining industry. Um, and the Liberals and Conservatives didn't respond to the Canadian Network on Corporate Accountability. The other parties did, and they agreed to it. And I think the Liberals didn't say anything in their platform on this matter. The Conservatives had some little mention about child labor internationally, I think they said on the matter. So the whole question of Canadian mining abuses abroad, unfortunately, it's kind of been pushed off of the political agenda. I think maybe the high point of the campaigning was in the lead up to the 2015 election, and then there was an ability to sustain some kind of focus on this 2016, 2017. Liberals come up with what is an okay proposal, and then it's completely gutted by mining industry lobbying. And the movement on Canadian mining globally has not really been able to reassert itself over the past, I guess, 5, 6 years. There's a story in Le Devoir about just the number of stories in different places on this, but about the climate crisis and the situation, and there's a story. It was basically about the tar sands and the exportation of Canadian oil, and the notion that you can deal with the climate crisis and continue extracting this very carbon intensive, greenhouse gas intensive oil in mostly in Alberta. And they said between 2012 and 2013, l'utilisation, the exportation of fossil fuels generated 10 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, the basic point here is, so long as is this big exporter of this really dirty oil, there's no chance of reaching any of the climate targets. The Canada Files has a story titled "What Was Jonathan Pedneau Doing in Conflict Zones? Human Rights or Regime Change?" Question mark. Jonathan Pedneau, of course, is the co-spokesperson of the Green Party, and he is very establishment-minded in his foreign policy outlook. I saw that in person a couple weeks ago when I attended the press conference launching the Green Party's foreign policy platform. His discussion, his framing of things was really not much different than Jagmeet Singh or Mark Carney. And the story basically shows how he's been, he was in Libya 2011, backing the Gaddafi. He was in working for Human Rights Watch in Venezuela, anti-Maduro, I think 2017, 2018 kind of range. And he's been in a whole bunch of these places, Sudan, Georgia. He's basically seems to have kind of operated in this NGO world of Canadian, US major foundation funded NGOs who very much align with the policy, usually kind of more on the liberal end of Washington, of Ottawa, and sort of a soft imperialism, if you want to call it that. And yeah, so the story just sort of details his background, which is it's a worth taking a look at the Canada Files story. The Congo, some developments there. First of all, some really horrible World Food Program about the amount of hunger in Goma, saying 2.5 million in acute hunger since December around Goma in the east of the Congo because of the Rwanda M23 invasion. But also maybe on the more positive side, and it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know the details here yet, but there's some agreement between Kigali and Kinshasa in that's sort of been negotiated by the Americans. And what it seems like, and so it seems like as of May 2nd, Rwanda's going to pull out. And basically, it seems like the Congolese have made some agreement with the Americans, sort of something similar to the Ukraine minerals deal, right? Which is Trump, this minerals deal, you give us some sort of discounted on your minerals as part of some sort of security type arrangement, or in the case of Ukraine, exchange for the loans and the weapons we've sent you. Anyway, something similar to that, some sort of like we give you our resources in exchange for security between Congo and the Trump administration. This may turn out to be very bad for the Congolese because I'm assuming the Americans are trying to get this at some good rates. Obviously, the Congolese government's in a tough position with much of the country controlled, or at least much of the east of the country controlled by Rwanda and its proxies. I think just ending the fighting would be a good thing at this point. Um, Anyways, we'll see where that goes. U.S. General Michael Langley, I think in I don't know if in the Senate, he basically said that Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, the leader there, is sort of young nationalist military who's a leader who's been in power for a few years now, that he's a threat. And a lot of people talking about how basically because he's been pursuing sort of a nationalistic policy, pushing out the French, U.S. military. Canadian mining companies are big players across the Sahel region. There's this anti-French, principally, but then secondarily anti-U.S. military kind of push in and and obviously Canadian mining companies are the big players in Burkina Faso and Mali, and so they're being somewhat targeted here. I don't know the basic. A lot of people, there's a recent coup attempt in Burkina Faso. A lot of people suggesting that this is sort of the U.S. general's comment fits within this coup effort, and it's sort of they're targeting him. I do hope to look more closely at Canada's role in this. I'm assuming there's a couple $1 billion Canadian mining investment in Burkina Faso, and there's been, I wouldn't say huge, but substantive Canadian political influence in the country. Major, obviously, economic influence, and I presume Canadian officials are at least quietly, maybe not so quietly, aligning with this U.S. French hostility to this reformist nationalist political leader. On Wednesday, it's the 50th anniversary of Saigon falling, U.S. pulling out, I think kind of mid-April of 50 years ago. And then their sort of puppet regime falls pretty soon after. I did an interview with the author of Devil's Trick, How Canada Fought the Vietnam War. I think he's a fairly establishment. I don't know much about the guy, but the fairly establishment historian. And we go over some of Canada's support for the U.S. war, and the Canada's support for the U.S. war much more extensive than is widely understood, and it dates back to the early '50s in supporting the French with weapons, to a NATO mutual assistance program as they tried to suppress independence movement in Vietnam, and also supporting it very openly diplomatically, Lester Pearson. And people can check out that interview on the CFPI, and I think it's on my YouTube channel. We're not going to hear much about Canada's role. There's some stories coming out, 50th anniversary stories, but most of it's sort of like the Vietnamese that were came to Canada, um, and sort of opening the doors to Vietnamese refugees and the like. La Presse had this story, a café avec Guy Saint-Jacques, um, the former Canadian ambassador to China, who is the main, probably the most quoted or one of the most quoted figures in the kind of criticizing China in recent years. And it's this big, long, sort of like personal sort of story. One of the main things right at the start of the story is a whole focus on the fact that Guy Saint-Jacques saying he wouldn't go back to China unless he has a diplomatic passport. And it's just so like, I don't know, if there's any chance that China would actually arrest him or not. But the fact that this is sort of centered as this like important political point is, colors the whole interview, is very kind of anti-China frame. I kind of skeptical that the Chinese would arrest him just for the sake of arresting him because he's criticized China. But that's the sort of message that is conveyed to the public. Canada Files has a story on Peter Yuan, the Markham Unionville Liberal candidate, titled "Toe the Anti-China Party Line or Else." Liberal MP candidate learns, and just basically had this sort of pylon, this anti-China pylon, because he's sort of viewed as having some connections to China. He's not like a really hostile to China. I think I talked about maybe the week before last, the Globe Mail's campaign. This follows after pushing out the Liberal candidate, who was a sitting MP, also on I'm forgetting his name, Paul Chang, I think it was his name, um, uh, because he had made that joke, off-color joke about sort of the conservative candidate about a bounty or money out for his arrest, and so it's clearly there's just like the what this story kind of further highlights is just this is a riding that clearly has a big Chinese Canadian community. There's lots of people in that community that don't want to be anti-China. the dominant media won't accept that, right? It's essentially the point, and they target a liberal candidate for not being hostile to China, and it's all part of this anti-China kind of stuff. Now, the Financial Times published this story based upon social media interventions in the Canadian election and interference. Now, we've heard a lot, the official body, the site, I think it's called, I forget what the acronym stands for. They said this whole thing about the WeChat, and there's evidence that there's some WeChat commentary that targeted some conservative candidate, and this sort of WeChat, and basically the Chinese government is influencing WeChat discussion, and that's interference in the Canadian election. Now, what this Financial Times story, based on some academic department, I believe, I forget what it was from, but it says the network has also found the proportion of Canadian. Oh, I don't have the full quote, but basically, they did they there's a huge amount of U.S. based pro or anti-Carney disinformation and bots and whatever, huge flow, particularly through X, over the past few weeks. Certainly, I forget the exact number they had, but it was a quite impressive number of how much kind of stuff. 350,000 accounts or something. I forget the exact number. But the point being that WeChat is fairly inconsequential in Canadian elections. I don't think we should exaggerate X or Twitter's influence, but it's probably I'm guessing 25% of Canadians that have some interaction with Twitter. When it comes to WeChat, it's probably like, I don't know, it wouldn't be more than like half of the Chinese Canadian community, my guess. I mean, one of my close friends as a kid, Chris Kwan. He was third generation. He didn't speak any Cantonese or Mandarin, right? Like, I mean, WeChat wouldn't mean anything to him. So, I don't know, it's about like 1.5 million Chinese Canadians, but like probably half of the community doesn't, well, either doesn't speak, probably quarter or third, or I don't know what doesn't speak Chinese, and then lots wouldn't be on WeChat, right? So, when you get down to it, it's probably not even. I'm thinking about it. It's whatever, like 1% of Canadians that have any interaction with WeChat. So even if the Chinese government was really gaming WeChat, it would be fairly inconsequential compared to X. And there's like no kind of big brouhaha about all this. And we knew this. This was obvious. We have like Elon Musk, who's very openly anti-liberal party. He runs X. He's clearly gamed the algorithm on X increasingly towards his far right politics, and yeah, and so it's published in the Financial Times. So it's not the Globe Mail. It's not like, and as far as I know, they didn't pick the Canadian media didn't pick it up. So you have this prestigious British outlet that publishes this, and it's not talked about by the official election interference body. So yeah, now the Chinese officials, there was a front page National Post story. Liberal hopeful calls China a like-minded ally. And one of the Liberal officials in a riding that has a fairly significant Chinese Canadian community referred to China as a like-minded ally. And they put this on the front page of the National Post. And then they quote Mark Carney saying that China is like our biggest threat. I don't know when he said that exactly. I assume that's recently. The Chinese ambassador said wants to partner with Canada to push back against U.S. bullying. That was kind of rejected. This week, Canadian officials are involved in, or the Canadian military is somewhat involved in the Balak Balak Balakatan 2025. It's this big military exercise, principally with the U.S. and the Filipino military. But there's a few other partnering countries, and Canada is one of those that is part of this partnering. Um, and of course, in recent years, Canada has been doing more and more uh, ties with the Filipino military as part of this U.S. push, which includes, I think, four new U.S. bases in the Philippines, pushing the Philippines into a more conflictual uh, uh, relationship with China under the Marcos, which is a bit of a shift from the previous Filipino government. And so there's an interesting though in terms of this foreign interference kind of question. There was a study. I forgot what polling firm. Um, it says so the public is kind of more on board with this with the interference question than the media. So there's this thing: the proportion of Canadians who say they're concerned about deceptive political influence originating from the U.S. has increased dramatically. Its findings show voters are more concerned about covert political meddling from the U.S. than from China, Russia, or India. Uh, and that's from that Financial Times story about the X and other social media, U.S. owned social media targeting Carney. So the public is more kind of attuned, I think, correctly, with U.S. as a danger than China, or India, or Russia. Um, there's also a poll that showed that the title is Canadians put U.S. relations on par with Putin's Russia. Says just 16%, according to Leger poll, says Canada's good relationship with the U.S. compared to 15% for ties with China, or ties with Russia. Meanwhile, 36% of Canadians say Ottawa has good relationship with Beijing, while the number ranks higher than 75% for Mexico, European Union, and UK. So the public is sort of kind of more hostile to the U.S. than Russia, according one way to interpret that poll at least. Um, so we'll see how some of this plays out post-election. And Trump today was really aggressive in his intervention, posted to his Truth Social, saying that basically saying people should vote for Poilievre. So we'll see how that plays out. Shifting gears a bit, there's a poll that shows that less than 1% of students rank the Canadian Forces as their top career choice. And it was only like 3 to 5% that had the Canadian military in like their top five choices. So it's a real problem to recruit for the Canadian military when I guess 17, 18-year-olds are not interested in that going that way. The Globe had a official column or editorial board perspective saying the Tories and Grits refuse to stand on guard. And it was this complaint about how neither party is willing to really do what need to do more than what it says, quote, rhetorical solidarity with his NATO partners. And complaining about they're not willing to put up enough money to the military. And this is a constant refrain. There's never enough militarism for the militarists. That's really a basic principle. Chrétien made that point quite a few years ago. Well, they always want more and more and more. There's always a need for more military spending. The Mondoise published this Just Peace Advocates story, finding that over $100 million in donations to the Jewish National Fund of Canada from 2003 to 2023 is just not reported on. So they just completely fail to report on this significant amount of money that the Miles Howe, I think maybe it was Karen Rodman, they just uncovered by chance by looking at other Jewish pro-Zionist charities, and basically when these other groups were sending money, sometimes big, quite large amounts, millions and millions at a time, to the JNF. JNF's just not counting for it at all, completely breaking the rules, CRA rules, and it just goes. The more you learn about this, the world of register. Well, first of all, registered charities in general, the whole thing, it should all be eliminated, right? There's no. This is all a big sop to wealthy people. All this thing, this charitable. If people want to give money to groups, give money. There's no tax deduction. That's how it should be. That across the board. Now, the pro-Israel charities is a whole other sector within this bigger issue that's a total scam. It's unbelievable how much public subsidy there is for this pro-Zionist uh, um, activity financing. This week on Friday, there was this column in the uh, Wall Street Journal headlined Harvard is an Islamist outpost. Harvard is an Islamist outpost. Okay, that's Harvard University. And it's by this woman, Ruth Wise, who I was not familiar with. And she's a Montrealer. And on X, a number of people post these other videos, crazy, just totally rabid authoritarian Jewish supremacist. And they people posted videos of her comments in different forums. And so I looked at her. Right away, I just assumed that she had gone to one of the many Jewish schools in Montreal that are these, indoctrination hubs for Jewish supremacy and colonial outlook. And lo and behold, she went to the school called what used to be called the Jewish People's School. Now it's called Jewish People's and Peretz's Schools. And embarrassingly, I had never heard of this school. The school's been around for more than a century, set up in 1914 by labor Zionist movement, so explicitly set up to promote Zionism 110 years ago. And it's still existing. It actually, for most of its history, was not very far, based in the plateau where I am. Fair, I've lived at different points in time, and close to where I currently live, and now it's out in Côte Saint Luc, but for most of its time. And so it's this serious Zionist school. It seems like it's mostly secular. It's very expensive, like it's quite a wealthy school. And I bumped into this La Presse investigation, which I hadn't seen back from October. This pretty long investigation about the subsidies to these private to the religious schools. And so in Quebec, all private schools you get more than $5,000 per student from the Ministry of Education, which is unique. I don't believe other provinces anywhere close to that, or in many cases, I think it's zero. It's outrageous, in my opinion. Why is the public ministry funding private schools? But this is a whole long Quebec history. There's lots of it's very high proportion that go to private schools, far higher than elsewhere in the country. Obviously, in part because they're subsidized. But what the La Presse story was basically saying is it's not just this subsidy, and he's saying that particularly the Jewish schools, there's a huge amount of because the Canada Revenue Agency seems to allow religious studies to be tax credited. So if you say, I don't know, if you pay $20,000 tuition and you say like 40% of that is religious studies, $8,000, you can get a tax credit for the $8,000. I don't think you necessarily get it all covered. Depending on your tax bracket and stuff like that, you might get like about half of that covered, I think. It's not exactly clear to me all the numbers. But basically, this La Presse investigation finds that there's this not only getting $5,000 from the Quebec ministry, that this school, the Jewish People's and Peretz's School, it's about another $7,000 or $8,000 is tax credited. And I actually think he might even be underplaying it, because the Combined Jewish Appeal, which is a registered charity, provides all kinds of tuition support for this school. And so this like wild Zionist Ruth Wise, who was the kind of the founder of Jewish studies at McGill, and then she worked at Harvard for like 20 years, who now says that Harvard is like an Islamist outpost. Um, this is the school she went to, and I just did a quick look at the school. Again, I had embarrassing. I didn't know anything about this school until 3 days ago. I just went on their Facebook, looked around a bit, and they send the kids to the Israel rally. They go to the March for Israel. They send delegation down to the March for Israel in Washington. They have former Israeli soldiers. They have Israeli flag out front. In 2018, they apparently set up the first Hebrew language class to talk about Israel. First Jewish day school that does that has a in Hebrew. It's sort of a pro-Israel class, all in Hebrew. Um, and it's the oldest Jewish school in Canada, and according to the Tablet article, maybe even in North America, is what their oldest continuous school at least. And and it's just it's getting this huge public subsidy, so it gets at least $5 million a year. And this whole world needs to be completely upended. And a few weeks ago, Harold Schuster, I think I may have mentioned this, I'm not sure, who's an IJV activist. I don't know him very well, but my understanding is he's on sort of like the better end of IJV, kind of. He had there was a they had the demonstration when the Israeli soldiers were at the Winnipeg Jewish Community Center that has the Jewish school in the same building, and in his kind of there was a whole brouhaha that Ben Carr, the Liberal MP, made a big kerfuffle about there being a protest from the Jewish Community Center and the school and this and that. And Harold Schuster made some comment on Facebook basically saying, well, if the school wasn't being, diverted from its real purpose, like as if it was like its real purpose was its positive purpose. And I mean, I've been thinking about this for like last few weeks because I think it's just stunning that there's just like a lack of recognition even among left even among anti-Zionist Jewish activists, that these schools they're not benign, right? These are hubs of indoctrination that, quite frankly, need to disappear, right? And like, they can say, oh, well, you're saying you want Jewish education to disappear. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm against private schools. Okay. Secondly, I'm against religious schools. And then you throw on top of that, these are Zionist, indoctrination sites that like they need to be. I'm sorry, like this is part of the project of killing Palestinian children. And there's, to me, the fact that I wasn't even aware of this, maybe the most important Jewish Zionist school in Montreal, that it's because no one's talking about this. No one is putting this on the agenda. No, and it's a big deal, right? Like this has to be confronted. These schools, I mean, whether it's a matter of just getting all the public money out, whether it's, broader political campaign, whether it's the, violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act, because they seem to be inducing kids to join the Israeli military. However, we need to go at this politically. First of all, we need to talk about it. Secondly, we need to start figuring out systematic campaigns to target these institutions. And obviously IJV and so when I'm coming and researching the school, this Sam Bick, I came across that Sam Bick actually went to this Jewish people's and Pret schools, and this is somebody I know, an activist here, I know from many years ago, and I just like why wouldn't he have he went to the school, he knows it's a Zionist hotbed. Why wouldn't he have been, initiating a campaign to defund this school, right? To expose. Anyways, it's just I think it's a whole area that needs to be confronted. It's very I don't think people want to confront it because it's basically saying I don't see what when a school is set up to be a labor Zionist promotion, 110 years ago, there's no reforming this, right? There's just weakening it. There's just trying to cut its public money. There's just trying to expose it. There's just trying to weaken it. I don't think there's a pathway to reform. I don't think private schools should exist, and I don't think religious schools should exist. So it's pretty easy for me to say I don't care about it beyond the Zionist side to it. But if people who maybe have a greater attachment to a Jewish education or that sort of side to things. I get that maybe makes them uncomfortable, but at some point there has to be a threshold here of Palestinians killed before we start taking the politics of stuff a little bit more seriously. Um, this week also is pretty extreme example of the Holocaust industry in action, and specifically the Montreal Gazette on Wednesday's paper. Front page was a woman, a survivor, a 98-year-old woman, and then with like concentration camp garb. That was the top of the page above the fold. And then they had a big story, long story on the bottom of the fold on the front page, headlined "Anti-Semitism begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews," Kotler says. And it was for a talk that Kotler was doing that was part of the 80th anniversary Holocaust commemoration put on by Combined Jewish Appeal as part of its Remembrance to Celebration, which is also includes the Israel Day event and Israel's Memorial Day, two other events. So Holocaust and Israel events are just like literally all part of the same Remembrance to Celebration project. Now, the story is obviously, it's sort of like half of the story in the Gazette is the survivor, and then half is Kotler saying all kinds of wildly anti-Palestinian things. So he's like, "We're also in the shadow and continuing pain of the unspeakable mass atrocities of October 7th, perpetrated, as you know, by a terrorist organization, Hamas, under Canadian law, but also an anti-Semitic genocidal terrorist group. Not because I say so, but because Hamas has said so in its founding charter of 1988. And since October 7th, Hamas has committed itself, and I'm quoting them again, to commit October 7 again and again and again until Israel's annihilation." And he goes on about Iran. "Iran itself is a leading architect of what has come to be known, and I first called it as such 25 years ago, genocidal anti-Semitism." So this is all ostensibly 80th anniversary of Holocaust, and it's basically just this like raving Zionist fanaticism of Erwin Kotler. And in the same issue of the Montreal Gazette, there was a op-ed from the media relations person of the Montreal Holocaust Museum titled "Anti-Semitism, Loss of Allyship Are Connected." And the media director for the museum it's just a totally bizarrely contradictory thing, basically complaining that since October 7th, since the genocide, there's like groups that are a little uncomfortable like partnering with the Montreal Holocaust Museum. Now, why would they be uncomfortable? Well, because the Montreal Holocaust Museum is little more than a pro-genocide entity at this point, and it quotes the Jacques Sada, who's the president of the museum, comparing Palestinians to the Nazis, and he says one of the phrases we use is "never again." Unfortunately, October 7, 2023, it was Holocaust all over again. So he's just basically saying that, Palestinian resistance and the Holocaust is all the same thing. And they did the same thing. Toronto District School Board had an image they posted, and it's like their Holocaust anniversary thing, and it's like Israeli flag, and it's just total conflation of the Nazi Holocaust and Israel amidst this genocide in Gaza. So it's just become ever more stark. Finkelstein talked about this 25 years ago. And over the last 18 months, it's been built up over 25 years, this Holocaust industry. But over the last 18 months, as it becomes harder and harder to defend Israel, it's just the Nazi Holocaust becomes ever more important. And here in Montreal, this Holocaust Museum is $120 million, heavily publicly funded, move to downtown to Saint Laurent Street. And it's just deepening the industry of using the Nazi Holocaust to justify Israel's crimes. There's a couple stories this week about actually many stories this week about the Jewish community apparently voting conservative. The CBC had a big long thing on the National about this because the rise of anti-Semitism. They have this long. The main woman they talked to in the National is this woman who's big outrage. She's like, "I was a lifelong liberal supporter, and then I went to the Israel rally, the Israel Day or whatever they call it in Toronto, the Israel Walk for Israel last year, and there was these guys in keffiyehs, and they were vitriol, and so then I've turned to the conservatives, and it's like it's just totally open. Like, you're going to a genocide rally, and your example of anti-Semitism is I go to a genocide rally, and there's people in keffiyehs yelling. I mean, okay, sorry, but if that's your example of anti-Semitism, you anyways, but so the National Post. This is an existential election for Jewish Canadians, written by these two doctors, well-to-do doctors, speaking about the most affluent community in the country. Existential. It's just out of control as it goes into 8 weeks of starvation policy in Gaza, where the UNICEF is saying the kids can't even cry anymore because they don't have food in Gaza, and these Toronto, or I think they're Toronto doctors, are talking about an existential election. In Ottawa, you had that Neri Kaplan, I think's her name, this doctor who was sort of viewed as sort of progressive during the COVID stuff, and she's just gone rabid Zionist over the past 18 months. She at the Ottawa district, the Ottawa school board, there's somebody who has a keffiyeh, and she says the keffiyeh is an act of aggression against her and Jews. So someone wearing a keffiyeh is an act of aggression. I mean, just outlandishly fanatical kind of opinion that we're seeing kind of all over. Um, the the Canadian Jewish News had this long story about a guy I didn't know anything about. His title, the headline was a top legal advisor on how our new PM should tackle Trump and support Israel. Allan Kessle is a former diplomat and senior legal consultant at Global Affairs Canada. Apparently, this guy was a top government lawyer for many years. He just retired, and he's just sort of like just talking about how to deal with Trump, and it's all like, kind of fairly reasonable, whatever. And then it turns to like Israel, and then the guy just goes off into just like, bananas fanatic zone, just like this Kaplan, the Ottawa district, the school board official, just goes off in just complete bananas territory, and is just like, again, 18, 19 months into this genocide in Gaza, and it's like, Israelis are the victims, right? Jewish Canadians are the victims. Um, it's just kind of hard to wrap your head around. And one of the things that's important, like, this is somebody who had like tons of institutional power until very recently, right? He's a top global affairs lawyer. He had this specific position at Global Affairs that they then got rid of in 2022 or something like that. It's like basically a top legal person at Global Affairs. It's almost sort of a deputy minister, and they're just completely irrational on anything with Israel, right? I mean, they're like, they're establishment imperial kind of in general, right? But then when it comes to Israel, it's just a whole other degree. And yeah, it's an important part of kind of getting a head around why the government and the whole political culture is just so pro-Israel. Is, quite frankly, there's a lots of Canadian Jews, often who went to these schools that are like, from like early age, are being indoctrinated into this really aggressive Zionist thinking, and they have, lots of positions of power all throughout, government, through medical world, through, media world, and when it comes to Israel, they just are off in, completely illiberal territory. Doesn't seem there's any threshold of Palestinian killed that will, shift their position. Um, there's a couple stories about the bubble zones that were interesting. The Blueprint for Disruption has a story: bubble zones, confining protests, uh, lawfare to limit our freedom of speech and right to protest. And then there was one, I think I got it from the Socialist Register, Toronto moves to limit the right to protest, an open letter to Mayor Olivia Chow. And there's a big pushback in Toronto to this bubble zone being pushed. And what the story, this one in the Socialist Register points out is that just the difficulty of, like, first of all, it's almost certainly against the charter, but then it gets into all kinds of things. So if you have a bubble zone on schools, well, my Joshua on Earth Day, the school went for a march. He made a little placard of like no to pollution, and it's actually quite nice. No to pollution, and the whole school went for like a march around the school. Well, if you have a bubble zone, kids are not allowed to have, like, grade twos are not allowed to have a walkout as part of like an Earth Day thing, right? Okay, well, you have a bubble zone in a school and there's a strike. Well, is it going to be a carve out for strikes? Well, this seems like that could happen, but it's not. So as the more you get into this, like, and then it talks about residential schools. Well, it was the Catholic Church, so you can't protest like this. There'll be, like you can't protest in front of churches, right? That's part of these bubble zone things. Well, they were the residential schools were Catholic churches, so how do So it's just like a total minefield, but it's moving along. It's moving along because there's this fanatic a pro-Israel a power structure that's moving it along, and you have like Olivia Chow, the mayor of Toronto. She went to the Nova exhibition commemorating the attack on the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. I'm quoting her now. What was meant to unite through music was shattered by hate. So here you are, 19 months into the Holocaust in Gaza, and the mayor, the supposedly like NDP mayor of Toronto, is attending these, like, pro genocide exhibitions, all designed to justify Israel's ongoing slaughter. Um, it's pretty remarkable to see. Uh, Now, on a more positive note, Shane Martinez, lawyer, he announced that two of his clients, or individuals who had charges, one for the encampment, they dropped the charges. These were pursued under the hate crime unit. Uh, Due to the conflict in the Middle East, the hate crime unit. So this guy who was, I guess, he was at the gate at the University of Toronto encampment, and like they had some policy of who could go in and who couldn't, and like a couple like Jewish Zionists came and played a whole game of you're blocking me because I'm Jewish. I don't know what stupid game that was played, but they were able to get him arrested. Fortunately, the charges are dropped, and that's like a year later and all these conditions. And another one charge of drop. I myself, my court thing was on Friday. It was just postponed pro forma, so it was supposed to be the date to set up a date for the trial. All that's happened is postponed to July 14th, and then that date we should set up a date to have the 1 day trial. We'll see if the prosecution even moves forward. Also on the positive side of it, McGill. So McGill students in November of 2023 passed this great genocide referendum. 78.7% of undergraduates, the biggest turnout in the student union's history, voted for this resolution. And then the Zionists went to the courts and they were able to get it, basically this like preliminary injunction that the student union couldn't ratify the vote. Finally, the student union won. The injunction was thrown out. And there was also another injunction. The McGill Student Union had a policy on anti-Semitism that was basically non-Zionist. And Neil Oberman, the guy, the lawyer that's helped Dahlia Kurtz go after me, he pursued that legally. That also got thrown out, so they're now allowed to adopt that policy. So two small blows to Zionist lawfare at McGill. I'll leave it at that, and I'll make Laura a co-host. I think I unmuted you, Yuri. Let me just try to find Laura.
Uh, should I ask my question, Eve?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, once again, Eve, thanks for a brilliant show. I've missed the last two shows, so it's great to be on. I guess Yeah, I guess I have two questions. I think one sort of goes back to what you were talking about with these private, seemingly innocent Jewish schools, but actually do more or less support Zionism and so forth. Does that kind of does that sort of remind you of the fact that very recently, there was Kai of Breakthrough News was talking about how Haaretz apparently wanted to interview him on this new documentary called The Encampments, which follows a lot of the of the Palestine solidarity protests that's happening specifically in the U.S. But apparently this Haaretz reporter wanted to more or less do a hit piece on it and wanted to do this sort of this fake objectivity of, oh, there was some anti-Semites in the protests and whatnot, and basically what was supposed to be a published interview just fell apart completely because Kai kept saying, no, there really was no anti-Semitism, or at least what's your evidence? And does that go to show you that we have to be that the Palestine solidarity movements, or any movements, for that matter, have to be very careful of who we align with our movements, because there are some bad faith actors or people who simply do not have the radical politics that the movement needs. Other examples I can think of is Mehdi Hassan, who lifelong Palestine advocate, but often punches left at anyone who's not part of the Democratic Party or the Labor Party, Norman Finkelstein, who is against the one state solution. And yeah, I'm curious your response on that. And what are the major newspapers? Who have they been? And yeah, just out of curiosity, what have the major newspapers? Who have they been endorsing as this is the party Canadians should vote for to lead the next government? Out of curiosity.
I actually don't know. I haven't really seen that many endorsements. I didn't see the Globe. I can't think of seeing the Globe editorial. I didn't. We haven't read today's paper. But I don't think I saw the Globe editorial. I didn't look at the National Post. I mean, the National Post was like, many, many columns endorsing Polyev. I don't know if I read their editorial board piece. I saw a reference to the Toronto Star piece that was I didn't read it. I don't have a subscription to the Toronto Star or access to it at the library. But the that it was kind of like it was what I think it was maybe Judy Rebick's comment about it being not it was sort of a little bit sympathetic to Polyev, and then people were, because it got purchased by these right-wing hedge fund, I think, or whatever, a couple of years ago. I don't know. I don't know where the papers are at with that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
What about the Quebec ones like Le Devoir or La Presse?
I can't think of what I saw. I don't think I saw the Little Wall doesn't run with an they have an editor that that publishes columns that are sort of like an editorial board, but not they don't. It's not like an unsigned editorial board like the Globe has, and the National Post and the Star, I believe.
Oh, interesting.
I can't really think of. Um, yeah, I can't really think of what exactly. I don't feel like it's the National Post is obviously very clearly pro Polyev, but I don't like my impression with the Globe is there's a sort of certain degree of hedging on Polyev, even though they're obviously traditionally a conservative party paper. There's a certain degree of discomfort with Polyev as the character. Now, yeah, in the initial question, I mean, obviously, I mean, there's people whose politics are all over in these questions, and like there's people who on board, a lot of people on board with Palestine eventually, and then sort of more liberal types, and then they they're quite aligned with all kinds of other geopolitical, like Mehdi Hassan, you're talking about in China and stuff like that. I think like more specifically to the question of like I think that there's a whole thing. I don't know if I want to get into this whole big discussion, but there's a whole thing that Laith Marouf and Tony Greenstein and David Miller, a huge big debate. I haven't caught it all about like where about Jews that have died fighting Zionism. And what Miller and Laith, as I understand it, is saying there hasn't been any Jewish person that's died fighting Zionism over the past century. And there's lots of white people who died fighting against slavery, and and there was somebody back in 1923, I believe, a Jewish anti-Zionist that was killed by Zionist forces. Uh, and I do think there is like this, like the political culture is so it prioritizes. There's so much like focus on anti-Semitism and so much fear of this and so much prioritization of the Jewish perspective on this issue that that just being like a nominal anti-Zionist Jew is really applauded. And so there's not a basically all the pressure comes from one direction. Okay, all the pressure comes from the sort of, okay, it's all an anti-Semitic movement, it's all anti-Jewish, and it's the worst, that's the worst thing in the world, and this, and there's almost no pressure. So like they take concrete like IJV gets endless critiques from CIJA, from B'nai B'rith, from all these different organizations, Jewish commentators, pro-Zionist commentators, and so there's almost no pressure from the left, if you want to call it. Invariably, in a situation like that, the you're gonna move toward like it. Basically everyone is malleable politically. I mean, we feel pressures from different directions. Everyone's like that. We deal with this in different ways, but every organization, every individual, to some extent, operates in that way. And so to me, like it's appalling. Like it's genuinely appalling that there's been no um, informational, let alone campaigning on like these Jewish schools. I mean, like it's wild, right? It's wild. This is huge amounts of public money. It's obviously a whole, long term. If you want to upend anti-Palestinianism in Canada, obviously this has to be dealt with, right? It's just there's no alternative. It has to be dealt with, and there's lots and lots of people in like IJV circles who went to these schools. I mean, they went to the schools. They know. Like, I'm just going on Facebook. I just going on the Facebook and like finding what's up. They actually went to it and had like the much more of the in depth whatever. And clearly, there's just not much appetite to rock the boat, right? There's people who I don't know. It's everything from perceive that like it's a good thing. I don't know how one would think that I don't know how if you call yourself a socialist and you call yourself a believer in like kind of universal values. I don't like private schools or private schools a good thing in any kind of private school, and then religious schools, and then the Zionism. I mean, like but there's clearly incredible amount of discomfort with like taking on. And again, someone like Harold Schuster, who I don't know, but what I understand from people who've done a fair bit of stuff with him, he's quite good, fairly good on the within the IJV spectrum. He's on the better end of the IJV spectrum, and committed. I believe he's genuinely pro-Palestinian, all that stuff. I'm not in any way questioning that, but there's this like de facto, partly because he's responding to this criticism. Oh, you were protesting in front of a Jewish school. How dare you? This is so terrible. And like the idea that they are using the protest in front of the Jewish, like Like that's a reason to be protesting. Like, how can you be? These schools like have IDF days. They have Israeli soldiers come there. They have Israeli flags. Like obviously we should be protesting these places. Obviously, but like the whole ethos is to be on the defensive and be like, no, no, no. We love that school. It's just that there happened to be an IDF soldier at some part of that establishment. No, we don't love that school. We don't love that school. How can we love that school? It's a Zionist like indoctrination hub. And so anyways, there needs to be a grappling with these kind of questions that very few people want to grapple with it, but I mean, there has to be a threshold of Palestinians killed that makes us get outside of the comfort zone and delve into these questions. And I for one have no problem whatsoever in saying these private Jewish schools that are promoting Jewish supremacy, they need to be targeted. They need to be systematically targeted. Sorry, that makes people uncomfortable, but
Okay, Catherine, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to I didn't make it to this protest, but the East Coast March, anti-genocide march that was held on April 12th, kind of like I know the big one was in Ottawa, but they had one in Halifax, and I was hoping to go but didn't make it. Um, they just on Free Palestine, Chibuktuk, Halifax, they had a post talking about what happened on that day, and apparently there was one particular police officer that was going on around even before the march started, saying you're going to walk on the sidewalk, you can't walk on the road, and then I guess they decided they would walk on the sidewalk for people's safety, and then the cops, that same police officer, parked in the crosswalk so that people had to walk around the car to get by, to get across the road. And the cop grabbed somebody on the way, tried to grab somebody who just kept walking. And then at the end of the march, I think it was at Grand Parade Square, City Hall, and somebody got pepper sprayed like from, if 1 or 2 feet away, and or some pepper gel, and they arrested, they detained and gave a ticket, some kind of traffic ticket to the same person who they tried to grab. And anyway, they're having a campaign to try to get people to call the Halifax police about it.
My experience with that is it's really important to just assert, and the police bend. That I've seen this play out so many times in Montreal, where you just assert, no, we're going to walk against traffic, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And now, like there used to be a huge battle over that, and now the Montreal police with the Palestine demos, they organize, they block it off to go against traffic. Like they've conceded to that as being like go down St. Catherine Street, like against, they won't necessarily want you to go a whole 20 blocks or whatever, but they'll let it go for like 4, 5, 6 blocks, and they'll basically facilitate it. But that's all a matter of like that assertion. It's so important to assert like our right, first of all, and then, basically force the cops to serve, to do traffic control for us rather than impede us. I know people don't want to, like, the more you concede, oh, we'll just go on the sidewalk, then they'll push it one more or whatever, right? Like they're what they really want is you not to be demonstrating. So anyways, but
I want to ask you, because something I'm very concerned about is I feel like there's a quietening down of activism around Gaza. I mean, we still have rallies once in a while, and I see on your posts the rallies in Canada, but Medea Benjamin of Code Pink said congressional staffers in the US have told her that they don't get anything like the volume of calls that they used to get about Gaza, and these staffers are sympathetic. They want them. And I've just noticed that the student in campus, the student activism has really been suppressed in the US, absolutely. And so I'm just wondering, it's being ramping up, like 175 killed this last week. I mean, it's ramping up and we're quietening down. Do you see that in Canada as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. The emails and stuff like that is are down. The email campaigning stuff. But I mean, there was a huge demo in Ottawa. That's only 2 weeks ago, right? And it was 20,000. So there was the Global Day of Action on Friday. You know, the here wasn't that big. It was maybe I think it was 500 people, but it was a decent sized demo. We had another demo on Sunday of about 400 people. Um, uh, there was a student strike in McGill. I mean, that's I think the first ever student strike like that. It was like and it was based upon a really big vote and stuff like that. So I think the vote Palestine. I mean, here in Montreal, there's clearly many dozens of people who on like basically on the drop of a hat were willing to come to try to occupy Jolie's office and Guilbeault's office, and then we did this other one, this liberal, and then I wasn't at a few of them, but other rallies in front and stuff like that. So there's still activity. I don't know, is it less? It makes sense that in the States with like just how many things Trump's going after in so many different directions, and I could see that people would be overwhelmed. And also, the repression is really real and on the back foot. But yeah, I'm impressed by the sustaining power. Obviously, I want it to be bigger. Obviously, I want more like kind of militant action and stuff like that. But I feel like I was very impressed. I didn't think it would be 20,000 people in Ottawa 2 weeks ago. I didn't think it would be that big. It was fairly nice weather that helped, obviously. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, does anyone have an update on the Palestinian protest in Olympia? I think it was part of the hands-off movement and Indivisible. Have you heard of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're a Democrat Republican combined thing, I think.
Democrat, I think.
Got the gay and these lesbians were putting down the Corys for speaking at that protest. And I was just stunned. Um, does anyone know more about this? Because when I looked it up, it didn't talk about the lesbians, and I heard about this on Palestinian Museum with Faisal Salad on some event he had, and they spoke about this protest.
I I don't know any more about it.
So disappointing that the lesbians would like, God, I hate when that happens because I support lesbians, but not pro-Zionist ones.
No,
Tough. Anyway, no one else heard anything.
no, but it sounds grotesque.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think
I mean, the
that's it.
Corys, how worse can it get when the Corys speak? Like how can they call them off on something like that? Their daughter getting killed in 2002, long before October 7th. Anyway, okay, go ahead with someone else.
Okay, I think that's it actually. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.